On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr., a civil rights activist and nationally respected man, was shot and killed. My grandmother, Linda Hoeschler, and her husband, Jack Hoeschler, were living in Chicago at the time when riots broke out on the 5th of April. This is the story of her living through the riots in Chicago in 1968.
Papa had heard about a program in Chicago that was an attempt to use lawyers not just to help people with credit card cases and divorce, which is how a lot of legal aid gets used.
The program was set up by the Bar Association to try and help people make their lives better through systemic change.
While Papa did legal work, I was assigned to run a Hull House.
While Nona worked in Hull Houses, Papa worked with public housing. Fred Hampton, a Black Panther who was later shot by the police, was one of Papa's clients.
We heard about Martin Luther King's assassination the night he was shot. It was all over the news. We were living in the North Side in what was considered a dangerous neighborhood. And I should add, too, that riots were happening in Chicago at least once a month. So we heard about Martin Luther King shooting. I think it was about 7 p.m. that night or something. We heard it. I know we had a small television. It was the television or the radio. And we were very sad about that. I mean, I had been asked to go to the March on Washington in '64 when I lived in New York, but my father was like, oh, he was afraid I'd get killed because I had some friends going down. And indeed, you never knew how those were going to go. But so I did not hear him in person, but I certainly knew who Martin Luther King was. I mean, he was well-known, well-respected leader.
When they heard about the assassination, at the time, Nona's mom was staying with them. And the next day, Papa had gone to work, and Nona walked out of her apartment with her mom and was amazed at what she saw.
We came out, and our whole street was full of kids marching down to Cooley High, which was catty corner to our house. Cooley High and Humboldt High were rough schools, and whenever you saw kids marching down from, say, Humboldt, you knew that they were going to start riots with Cooley High. And I said, we should stay around. And my mother said, Linda, this is one time we should get out of here.
Nona and her mother got in the car and were around halfway to downtown Chicago when they heard on the radio that riots were breaking out on the north side, near where their apartment was.
So when these kids came down from Humboldt High, it was violent with the kids from Cooley High, and they went out just beating every white person they could find. So it was brutal. Then we went down to get Papa. He said, stop at the office. We drove to my mother to the airport, and we went to the top of I think it may be in Papa's article, but the top of a hotel. The whole west side is burning. We said Daddy called a friend of his, George Mullinoff, who was a year ahead of him at NYU Law, who lived on the Gold Coast, which was a nice area, just about 8 blocks to the east of us, near the Lake Michigan, and asked if we could stay there because George was in the National Guard and he was assigned back to our neighborhood to guard it. So we stayed there for most of the week.
Nona also remarked that the Black people that she worked with in the Hull Houses offered for her to come stay with them because they knew that the north side was very violent. Nona and Papa began driving to their apartment to get clothing for the week.
Papa drove us out of downtown Chicago, and the roads are clogged. So Papa drove on the railroad tracks, and I'm crying because I'm afraid we're going to be hit by a train.
They turned onto a road and went towards their apartment when they saw what looked to be bodies.
We turned left, and I started to cry because there were all these bodies in the street. And I couldn't believe it. Windows of shops were broken in. The police were around. It was very quiet. And whenever it's very quiet in a city, it often meant that riots were about to start. So it was unnervingly quiet, I would say. So we drove west to our apartment with all these bodies out there. As we got closer, we realized that they were mannequins from the stores. And that's another thing you see and you see it in any city, when there are riots, the locals break up their own stores. They don't go to like the white area, they go to their own area. So it really cripples the area again.
When they got to their apartment building, they told the police what they were going to do, and they ran into the apartment and only grabbed enough clothes to last them the week, got out, and drove to George Molinov's apartment.
We called Papa's parents in La Crosse only to learn that Papa's cousin John Murray, that he had been shot in North Minneapolis. When you read about who were the fatalities by city, there's one for Minnesota, and that's Papa's cousin, his second cousin. And that was really too bad.
John Murray lived on the north side of Minneapolis with his wife and was very liberal and very pro-black rights.
But unfortunately, he stepped off a bus that night, and a man named Clarence Underwood, who was kind of a petty criminal, said, "I'm going to shoot the first honky I see." And it was Jack's cousin, so he kneecapped him and then shot him in the head.
They also heard about riots in Detroit and in other cities, and they decided to stay in the apartment for a week until things cooled down.
Papa just, of course, had legal work to do to defend people. People were in the hospital. It was crazy. It was a war zone. You see pictures of the Ukraine, and it felt a lot like that, very unstable. So we stayed, as I said, the apartment for the week until it seemed safe to go back. But I have to tell you that all of Chicago, as I said, there were riots happening every month when we were there. And so we fully expected, in fact, there were more riots.
When she had my mom on October 1st, she told Papa that she had to leave Chicago.
I was tired of, we had a little roof deck in the back, and I remember one night Papa said, "Get down to your stomach." I'm like 8 months pregnant. I had to crawl in because there was a gunfight going over me. So it was a very rough time. You know, it took two liberal kids and made us radical in some areas and more conservative in others.
This whole experience for my grandma changed how she thought about the world. It taught her to give more and take less, and never underestimate how much things can mean to people.